Why two governments nearly went to war with each other over where to build this dam. In 1958, during the construction of the Kariba Dam, 11 men fell into wet concrete. Their bodies were never recovered. To this day, many people will tell you those men are still inside the wall of the Kariba Dam. Sealed in, they became part of the structure holding back 180 billion cubic meters of water with their bones. Then a flood happened, a statistical impossibility that happened twice in 2 years. They were not surprised at all. They had warned everyone before the construction of the dam wall even started. They said, "You cannot build a wall through the home of Nyami Nyami. The river god will not allow it." This is the story of the most expensive wall ever built in Southern Africa, and almost 70 years later, Zimbabwe and Zambia had to spend $294 million just to stop it from falling down. By the end of this video, you will know the real construction cost. The numbers will shock you. The last chapter of this video is something happening right now, and it affects both Zambia and Zimbabwe. These are the details that takes place behind the scenes and you barely pay attention to them. In the 1940s and 50s, the copper belt of northern Rhodesia, today Zambia, was one of the richest mining regions on earth. The world was rebuilding after the Second World War. Everyone wanted copper wire, and the mines were hungry too for one thing above everything else: electricity. At the same time, southern Rhodesia, today Zimbabwe, was industrializing fast. Factories in Salisbury and Bulawayo, a growing rail network, all of it needed electricity. Here's the part most people don't know. Kariba was not the first choice to build a dam. Northern Rhodesia, Zambia wanted the dam on the Kafue River, a river that is in their side, closer to the copper belt, cheaper, smaller, less destructive. On paper, Kafue made sense. But in 1953, Britain merged Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia and Nyasaland into one federation. And Southern Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, the richest of the three, used its muscle. It insisted the dam go at Kariba Dam, on the Zambezi itself, on the border between the two territories. Bigger, the Kafue project was put on hold. Kariba won. The decision poisoned the relations inside the federation. Many historians argue it is one of the reasons that eventually contributed to the break of the federations in the first place. Now think about what they were attempting. The Kariba Gorge in 1955 had no roads. Construction vehicles literally followed elephant paths to reach the site. Everything, cement, steel, machinery, thousands of workers had to be brought into a malarial valley in the middle of the bush. The design itself came from the French firm Coin and Bellier. It was elegant, it was daring in the first place. The main contractor was Impressity of Italy, and thousands of Italian workers came to the Zambezi Valley, collaborating with the local workers. It was about to go down. So how much did it cost to build? Let's break it down properly, because the numbers you see online are often mixed up. 1955 to 1959, the dam wall itself plus the South Bank power station on the Zimbabwean side costed roughly about $135 million in 1950s money. However, economists estimate the full historical project costed around $2.5 billion in modern terms. The second power station on the Zambian side was delayed for years by politics, by the collapse of the federation. It was finally completed by Michel Construction in 1977. When the whole project was done, Harare, Bulawayo, the copper belt of Zambia, whole cities began running on Kariba power. On a spreadsheet, it was a win for everyone, but the spreadsheet don't record everything. 57,000 people lost their world when the construction was done. Before construction of the dam, The Zambezi Valley was not empty. For generations, the Batonga people lived along both banks of the river. They farmed the rich floodplain soil. They fished. They buried their ancestors in that ground. Their entire spiritual world was anchored to that river. And in the mid-1950s, government officers arrived and told them the water is coming. You must move. Approximately 57,000 Batonga people were forcibly relocated. Many were moved to land that was drier, rockier, and infested with tsetse-fly, far from the fertile riverbanks that had fed them for centuries. Communities were split apart. Some resisted. On the northern bank, resistance at Chisamu village ended in confrontation with colonial police, and Tonga villagers were shot dead. This is a documented dark chapter of the relocation, of the whole relocation. The Tonga people are often called the forgotten people of Kariba. The dam itself did electrify two nations, yet for decades, many Tonga resettlement areas remained without electricity, punished for resistance. They would stay across the water at the power lines that passed them by. For the Tonga, this was not just an economic loss. The river was sacred. Ancestral shrines went under the water, graves went under the water, and the home of the Nyami Nyami was destroyed. Which brings us to this part of the story that engineers themselves still don't like to talk about. If you are a Tonga or your family comes from the Zambezi Valley, the comment section is yours. I want you to tell me the story that you've had from your grandfathers and grandparents. In Tonga tradition, Nyami Nyami is the river god of the Zambezi, a great serpent with the head of a fish. It is told that when times were hard, elders said Nyami Nyami would allow people to cut meat from his body, and Nyami Nyami did not live alone at the end of the day. He had a wife who lived downstream of the gorge. When surveyors arrived and began to build the Kariba Dam, the Tonga elders gave a warning that colonial officials dismissed as superstition. The war will separate Nyami Nyami from his wife, and at the end of the day, he would destroy it. Construction began in 1955. By 1957, the Zambezi flooded, a monster flood, the kind hydrologists said should occur perhaps once in 100 years. Water was rising through the gorge, destroyed access roads and equipment damaged. The engineers recalculated, rebuilt, pressed on. A once-in-a-century flood. They reasoned and said it would not happen again. It would not come again. The flood would not happen. It came the very next year, and it was bigger than the last one. So we're talking about a flood that never happened before, happening during the construction period. The flood was described as a once-in-a-thousand years event. It obliterated the Coffer Dam. It swept away the access bridge. It smashed the parts of the works the men had rebuilt. Two impossible floods back to back in 2 years. To the engineers, it was a coincidence of hydrology. To the Tonga, no mystery at all. Nyami Nyami had passed through, forcing his way down the river to reach his wife, and the wall stood in his path. During the disasters of the construction era, one story above all says a group of workers, many of them Italian, fell into wet concrete during the works and their bodies could not be recovered. The legend says they remained inside the demo even up to date. Now I must be honest with you, because that is what we do on this YouTube channel. Engineers and historians dispute the details. Some accounts say bodies trapped in concrete could not be removed. What is documented is this: 86 workers, some records say 87, died building Kariba Dam. Italian and African workers side by side. As the lake filled between 1958 and 1963, the sheer weight of billions of tons of water pressing on the Earth's crust triggered waves of earth tremors. Multiple earthquakes were recorded in the region. Science calls it induced seismicity. The elders called it a god turning over in anger beneath the water. In December 1958, the river was finally fully dammed. The water began to rise, and as it rose, it created islands, and on those islands, animals, thousands of them, were trapped, starving, drowning. What followed was one of the most extraordinary wildlife operations in history, Operation Noah. From 1958 to 1964, a small team led by Ranger Rupert Fothergill, working with boats, ropes and nets and their bare hands, rescued over 6,000 animals from the rising waters. We're talking about elephants, rhinos, antelope, leopards, snakes, even birds. They were ferrying them to the mainland. Many were released into what became Matusadona National Park on the southern shore, which is the Zimbabwe side. Now we come to the present day, because the story of Kariba's coast never actually ended. For over 60 years, every time the gates opened, water exploded out of the wall with unimaginable force and crashed into the riverbed below. Decade after decade, that water did something terrifying. It dug. The plunging water carved a hole in the bedrock at the foot of the dam. Let me say that plainly. The water was slowly excavating the ground underneath one of the largest dams in the world.
Zambia has a very young population, Zimbabwe as well. And these young population, of course, it will play a very significant role in the future in the development of their country. But in order to do that, they need to have opportunities. And most importantly, they need to have hope. And our Global Gateway strategy is also focusing on that.
The World Bank called improving Kariba's safety a matter of regional urgency. On top of that problem, there was a second silent threat, a slow chemical reaction inside the concrete itself. Alkali aggregate reaction causing the wall to gradually swell over the decades. So in 2014-2015, Zambia and Zimbabwe, through the Zambezi River Authority, launched the Kariba Dam rehabilitation. The price tag, approximately $294 million US. The money came from the European Union, the World Bank, the African Development Bank. The work was staggering. French contractor Razel Becky pumped out the plunge pool, over 500,000 cubic meters of water. Then he blasted and excavated roughly 750,000 tons of rock to reshape it so that the falling water dissipates its energy safely instead of digging towards the wall. Engineers say the rehabilitation could extend the dam's life by around 60 years. So here's the bitter twist. After spending nearly $300 million to make sure the dam doesn't break, the biggest threat to Kariba today is that there is often not enough water in it. There is repeated droughts. Repeated droughts have dropped the lake to critically low levels multiple times in the past decade, collapsing power generation and plunging Zimbabwe and Zambia into brutal load shedding. Some Tonga elders again have their own explanation for the failing rains and the restless lake. They say Nyami Nyami is still separated from his wife today and he's still waiting. So what did Kariba really cost? $2.5 billion in today's money, I would say. And by some estimates, another $294 million US later, just to keep it standing. Kariba is a genuine engineering wonder built ahead of its schedule. But Kariba is also a warning that when powerful men draw lines on maps, someone never in the room pays the price.